I'm investigative journalist Molly Barrows. For years, I've covered the stories that made headlines in Northwest Florida and all along the Gulf Coast. Murders, missing persons, and mysteries of all kinds. These cases are far from over for many victims because the full story has yet to surface. Join me for Gulf Coast Confidential, where I dive into the saltier side of the South and expose the lies, greed, and corruption that often weighs down the truth. It's time to turn the tide and get a shot at justice. Hey everybody, I'm Molly Barrows. Welcome to the Gulf Coast Confidential podcast, where we cover some of the most scandalous crimes and cases that bubble up in Northwest Florida and beyond. Today we've got another episode on a case we've been following for several months now about Gulf Breeze plastic surgeon Dr. Ben Brown. This is Beauty Buyer Beware 3. If you've been following this case, then you know we've got two other episodes entitled Beauty Buyer Beware 1 and 2, and you can catch up on the basics of this case and how it unfolded. But joining me as always to discuss these cases is Pam Hill. She's a pharmacist and a victim's advocate. Pam herself has experienced violent crime in her own family. Her sister, Sharon Adelot, was brutally killed by her own son. That's Pam's nephew, and it's a case that is still ongoing. So Pam can talk about a lot of these cases from personal experience, and we're happy to have you on here. So thanks for always joining us, Pam.
Thank you for always inviting me.
Absolutely. All right. Well, this is a case, like I said, that we've been following for several months, and I've got a new article that recently came out in the Pensacola News Journal sort of updating what's going on with the case of Ben Brown and what started as the untimely death of a 33-year-old young mother of 3 has now essentially turned into a state investigation into what happened, not just to her, but to many patients that came forward in the wake of her death who said that they had experienced botched surgeries at the hands of Dr. Ben Brown. So the state of Florida is now investigating these incidents, these complaints, and we'll see what happens. It's an open investigation. The details have not been released. But that's just some of what I get into in this article, Pam. Did you get a chance to read it?
I did. I read everything.
Outstanding. Thank you. And what did you get out of it when you read it?
Well, that it's notching up a little bit and that we're looking at the bigger picture, because I'm sure he didn't mean for his wife to die.
Absolutely.
With elective surgeries and kind of near the happiest part of the year, Thanksgiving, Christmas time, and it was just that so many things went wrong. Whatever could go wrong went wrong. But opening the door to that, Hillary's untimely and unnecessary death, it brought patients out talking about their experiences and with Dr. Ben Brown. And so that's kind of what I got of it. It's the same thing that I advocate for. See something, say something, do something. You have to speak up. But, there had been a lot of back and forth. These people did say these patients had some worries or concerns, and they were kind of just told, well, that's just your body. Your little body's like that. It's 1% of the people that have it. But, when a dozen people right here on the Gulf Coast get told that's not a true statistic, or it's an outlier in a certain place.
Yes, and like I mentioned before, if you're not familiar with the nuts and bolts of this case, you can check out Beauty Buyer Beware 1 as well as 2. And in a nutshell, basically, Hillary Brown went into cardiac arrest while she was having elective procedures done at her husband's office, Restore Plastic Surgery in the Tiger Point area of Gulf Breeze. And according to the Santa Rosa Sheriff's Office and emergency response, essentially reports, they said that they got a 911 call that the doctor had possibly over-medicated the patient. Now, we don't know her cause of death. Those results have not been released yet, either by the medical examiner's office or the Santa Rosa Sheriff's Office. So we're waiting to see what that exact cause of death was. But they did tell us when it happened at the end of November that it would be several months because it would take a while to get those toxicology reports back. And that seems to be what a lot of this is hinging on. But she did go into cardiac arrest at his office. 911 was called. She was placed on life support, but she was taken off life support about a week later because there just simply wasn't enough oxygen to her brain, right, is what her father, Marty Ellington, told me. And her organs were donated. And of course, her family is crushed. They don't understand. Her daughter was alive one day, and then the next she was dead. So they have a lot of questions as well. But after her death, in the wake of her death, there were a lot of patients that stepped forward and said, hey, it's terrible what happened to her. before, but I also feel like I had botched surgeries. I was a patient of Dr. Ben Brown, and that would be more in Beauty Buyer Beware 2, that episode, if you want to hear a little bit more about that. And since then, so this is basically a 3-month follow-up to this case where, again, we update cause of death, as we know that those results have not been released yet. But we also talked to local legislator Michelle Salzman, and she's on a health committee for the House that basically oversees regulations for doctors in the medical community. And she said that she's been following this case since shortly after his wife passed, and that the Department of Health for the state of Florida, the Florida Department of Health, is investigating Dr. Ben Brown and some of these complaints about these patients who say that he essentially botched their work. And in essence, what they said is that they had wounds that wouldn't heal. They didn't get proper post-op care. They had infections that wouldn't go away, what's called necrosis, where there's not enough blood circulation to the skin and they have to cut off rotting parts of the body, essentially. So there are consistent patterns of complaints. But what I thought was especially interesting, to your point about it's about the bigger story, a lot of these patients said that they did file complaints. A lot of these patients that I spoke to also said that they did not file complaints. To be clear, I have received more than a dozen messages from both former patients as well as employees who some want to have their names put on the record, some do not. But there is a pattern of the complaints that they have shared with me. And what I have shared with the public is thoroughly researched, validated, checking out their histories to make sure they actually were patients. They have also sent me pictures. They have sent me videos. I have seen and published several of these pictures as well. And it's terrible. And I think of Jane Hawkins, who, went to him for a mini mommy makeover and to have some older breast implants removed at her doctor's recommendation. And she had a 9 by 4 inch wound that should have healed quickly, what should have been a simple surgery, according to her and according to another plastic surgeon that I spoke with. And it's not unusual for there to be problems. Sometimes problems do come up, but in this particular case, it was almost life-threatening to her. She had to have emergency surgery, and they had to close the wound first, and it was a huge gaping wound. And if you have a weak stomach, some of these pictures, you may want to just be forewarned. Right. But then, to be fair, I also spoke with other patients who said that they never had any problems, that Dr. Brown did great work for them, and that they are thankful that he did it.
Right.
But so many of these patients who said they did not have good work, those that, including an employee who said that he also did not follow standard protocol when it came to cleaning instruments or having a clean environment. He was also, she said, this particular employee, former employee, who she said they fired her because she did complain about these issues. But anyhow, she was saying that there was a lot of issues as far as cleanliness as well. But when these folks came forward, whether it was to the Florida Health Department or others in the medical community, they said little was done. So that was one of the issues that I tried to address in this article about, okay, what happened? Did the Florida Department of Health receive these complaints? Were they not considered? Did they not make it to the level to be considered or evaluated properly? And I think that's where I'm going to go with my next story. Yeah. What is the process for the Florida Department of Health? What do you have to do to file a complaint? What do you have to do to get it heard? Because when I was researching that second story, I emailed and called the Florida Department of Health multiple times, multiple days in a row, weeks in a row, and received absolutely no response. So if it wasn't for Representative Michelle Salzman basically talking to us and telling us what's been happening on a state level, we wouldn't know. And so I can see why some of these patients had their concerns about being heard when we also, representing the Fourth Estate, were not responding. The state didn't respond to us either. So I can understand why they would be frustrated.
Right. And it should be relatively easy to put in a complaint or a concern or some feedback, because I think you do most things online now. But with the Department of Health, and I know with the Board of, say, Medicine, Pharmacy, Chiropractic, Dentist, they have a committee that meets on these complaints, and it's usually administrative. And what they do is they read that and the things that are submitted, and then if they find probable cause is when they take action. But we have to remember, a lot of these things maybe were happening during COVID, and maybe people didn't send in enough data or a picture or something, because that probable cause part starts wherever their board is, or like Tallahassee. And so that's what happens sometimes. But the Department of Health and the boards of pharmacy, chiropractic, dentists, doctors, their primary reason for being is to protect the general public. A lot of people think it's just to protect like a doctor or to scold a doctor or what have you. That is not their primary purpose. Their primary purpose is to protect the general public.
Absolutely. And I think some in the public feel like that has not been taken seriously or they haven't felt heard.
Right.
So we don't really know if they were ignored. We don't really know if it just didn't meet the standard that they would normally take a look at when it comes to complaints. I do know that, to your point about being online, when you search Ben Brown online, according to the Florida Department of Health, he doesn't have any complaints against him that essentially merited or warranted any sort of disciplinary action.
Right.
So in that regard, you know, there's nothing on there that if you were a patient researching him, you would say, okay, well, according to the Florida Department of Health, he's got a clean record.
Right.
And then also, you know, I've reached out to Ben Brown multiple times. Every time I've done a story, he has never responded. He has declined a request for interviews through a PR firm that he hired that actually handles crisis management. They basically are there to rescue reputations. And this latest time when I reached out to him on this last article, usually the last two times, several times before when I reached out on the last two articles, the Red Banyan reached out to me and responded, even though I had reached out to Ben Brown and essentially said, you know, he's devastated and grieving the loss of his wife. He's been a good doctor. He doesn't find an adequate job. And these are mistruths and allegations that are not true. But this time there was no response from the PR crisis management company. There was no response from Ben Brown. I did reach out to him. He is more than welcome anytime to talk to me. He can email me at molly@mollybarrows.com, along with any other patients or employees, because I am continuing to get messages, especially through Facebook, from former patients and employees who say they also saw what they thought was concerning behavior, either patients complaining of botched work. One woman reached out to me just last night and said the same thing, that you know, he botched a surgery, according to her, and that when she told him that, you know, what should have just been 3 surgeries turned into apparently a dozen surgeries. Wow. And left her with, she said, a gaping wound, another one that was just difficult to deal with, and she has to have multiple surgeries to correct it. I don't know if this is normal. I don't know what the situation was. I just know what she told me, and that when she confronted Dr. Brown about it, that he essentially told her that it was her body that was the problem. And that is consistent with many other patients that I've spoke to. When they go to him and they say, I've got this infection that won't go away, I've got this wound that won't heal, he tells them that they're the 1% that doesn't have that response. They're the 1% that had that response, I should say, that didn't heal properly, or they're the 10%, or they're the 5%. But it's another way of saying it's you. That's why it's not healing. It's not me.
Right. It's your body, and you're not responding well. 1% would be like, what, 100,000, you know, of surgeries. And sometimes people make up percentages and stuff to serve them well. And someone that just can't hear what you're saying, and they surely can see. You can see if there's a wound bigger than a giant Band-Aid on somebody's little soft tummy. You can see that when you can see their gut walls and things like that, or they've got one breast higher than the other, one shaped differently than the other, or a big old scar on it.
Lack of feeling, that's another thing I've heard, nerve damage.
Right, exactly. Got a lot of nerves all over your body, especially by your heart and chest. So it's them telling him, but a person that can't hear what someone's telling them, and you can see it with your very own eyes, that's not your best work. And I don't see any other contemporaries or colleagues saying, no, y'all are wrong. You know, nobody's saying that is the standard acceptable practice, because it isn't. Wounds should heal, and things should not be gaping open. Skin should be knitted together. You can't heal. That's dangerous like that. So, and the last thing to do to someone that came in that wanted to look better or feel better is to make them feel bad. That's where we get right into that narcissist role. There, I told you how to feel, and that's what you're going to feel, and this is where you are. They just can't handle the truth. So they have to say, all right, I blame you. The blame has to come on that person. Remember we talked about that Darvo response? Deny, attack, reverse the victim and the offender. That's exactly what they'll do, just right like that. And I think that people just felt like hopeless, like nothing's going to get done. It is going to get done, and it takes a long time for things. I'm frustrated with the legal system. You know, I'm having to learn things about it, working on it 10 years of what I feel like is unjust and minimized and invisible. That's a very horrible feeling on top of having yourself cut open from your sternum all the way down below your hips and not
Oh my
heal.
gosh, I know. And the other thing that's so heartbreaking to me, because I have interviewed many of these folks, I have communicated them again via email, and so many, and it's not just women, it's men too. And I know I've mentioned that before, but I want to keep emphasizing that. I think if you've not had any kind of elective procedures done for plastic surgery, perhaps there's this perception that it's your choice, that it's a vanity thing. But in many cases, these are cancer patients and they have to have reconstructive surgery, or they want to have reconstructive surgery in the wake of having mastectomies or double mastectomies. And after undergoing cancer treatment, and their bodies are tired, they're ravaged from chemotherapy, they just want to feel normal. They just want to feel healthy. They just want to look normal again, too. And sometimes they are elective procedures. Maybe people are getting older. They just want to feel more confident and comfortable in their own skin, literally. And so I think there's this feeling of shame about coming forward and complaining if they don't feel heard. And what I hear from several of these patients who said that when Dr. Brown basically put it back on them that, well, your body's not responding appropriately, this is a rare issue, that they took it very personally. They were like, okay, well, I guess it's just my own fault. It's my own fault because my body isn't geared to handle this. And I'm not saying I'm not a doctor.
Yeah.
Maybe that's true. Maybe there really was something to do with their bodies that didn't heal properly. But from the wounds and the injuries and the witness accounts that I have seen, it certainly seems like more could have been done and should have been done to address certainly the post-op wound care.
Oh, yeah.
But it's the guilt and the shame they feel that breaks my heart.
Well, that's what happens. You get to doubting reality. You get to doubting the facts. You get to doubting yourself, and then you almost feel bad, like he's the victor, And that's one thing that a narcissist will do. They'll either be the victor or the victim. They will never be the troublemaker. And so they put that out there. And of course we get a lot of our self-confidence from the way we look or what we have together. And I kind of beg to differ on when they say non-elective or elective surgery. Almost everything we have done is elective unless we're in an emergent situation. People don't have to get a knee fixed or something. So that seems like that's a get out of jail free. I can mutilate, maim, massacre, botch anything I want to on you. No, you can't.
I know. At the very least, first, do no harm.
Right.
That should absolutely be the mission. And I feel like a lot of these patients feel like that was not. And then when it did go awry, some of them just felt like it wouldn't be worth it to file a complaint because they felt like they were at fault. They felt stupid. And then some of them just punished themselves for they feel like they were manipulated,
right.
And they blame themselves for that too. And I think that that's also a common response that I'm seeing among some of these folks is this feeling of, well, some of them actually did file complaints and essentially they felt like they were ignored by the state. And those that didn't felt like they just didn't owe it to themselves to file a complaint, even though they were struggling. In some level, they felt like they were to blame.
Right. Well, and I think that maybe some changes will come out of this, many changes, but one that could help everybody, at least send back a letter that says, we are in receipt of your complaint.
Right.
And we're going to take the next 60 days to do this, and we'll let you know. And follow up and do it. Because this is not right. And this gives a big old black eye to medicine, pharmacy, everybody practicing healthcare, because I hardly know any healthcare professionals, even like veterinarians. Most of us chose our career because we care.
Right.
You can make more money doing other stuff. You really can. Being in business, you can make more money than healthcare these days. And so it's not about money, but you should always validate people's feelings. When someone comes in the drugstore and says, y'all gave me the wrong medicine, I don't immediately go, no, we didn't. Or you stupid. You can't read it and this, that, and the other. Or we told you.
You're among the 1% that can't read directions on
right. Or just takes a handful of it.
Right.
And when somebody comes back in, all people really want is to be heard and a remedy. They weren't in there like rioting or anything like that, but he had an answer for everything. And he wasn't under anybody else's eye. And I have a feeling when doctors don't want to practice in a hospital or near a hospital sometimes, and they only want to do surgeries off campus under their own type of where they've set up the clinics and they can bill for their part, not the hospital. I want every one of my surgeries I ever have done, and they have been, in a hospital.
Yes, and he did perform many of these procedures in a hospital, but when he was making these corrective procedure surgeries, most of those, according to the patients that I have spoken to, took place in his office.
Right.
And that's where there were additional concerns.
Right. And I mean, that's not something that untoward or unbelievable, that if it's just a little, let's fix this up. But my whole thing is being met with the resistance immediately when it's clear. None of your contemporaries are saying, yeah, that's great. None of your colleagues are standing up for you. And they're not standing up for him right now either, because this has been just a perfect storm of botched things going wrong.
Yes, and I think whether it's former patients who said that they had botched surgeries or members of Hillary Brown's family, there's this question of, well, if all these people have been having problems for all this time, for years even, why wasn't anything done? And we're still trying to get the answers to that. But I do have some information along those lines, and that's also in this latest article, which you can find on pnj.com. But essentially, and I spoke to two different personal injury attorneys in town, one that is actively accepting cases and another that actively has a medical malpractice suit against Ben Brown over similar allegations that we're discussing. So both of those attorneys have told me, and in fact, you can read it in the article, that they have been hearing about Dr. Ben Brown for years, that patients have been coming and saying, I had this problem and I had that problem. Many of those patients, they turn away and they don't take up their case for a civil liability because they said Dr. Brown kept the minimal level of medical malpractice insurance. So it wasn't worth their while to represent the case because there wouldn't be that big of a payout, maybe not even to cover the cost of investigating and doing the case. And that actually goes to a whole bigger story. In this country, I know personal injury attorneys get a bad rap, but that is actually one of your few avenues to justice in this American economy in this American capitalistic corporate worshiping economy that we have. You know, if you don't have a personal injury attorney that's willing to fight for you, there really isn't a lot of recourse. Government institutions are slow, they're clumsy in their response, whether it's, monitoring food, monitoring chemicals, monitoring any aspect of safety, including doctors. You're rarely going to get the kind of result that you might want. To your point, whether it's just somebody hearing you and feeling heard, having some sort of avenue of accountability, even if money's not your goal, sometimes money's the only thing that gets the attention of people who are deliberately breaking the law or deliberately disregarding the safety of the people who use their products.
Right.
So in that regard, these personal injury attorneys, it's not necessarily a bad thing that they're turning down these cases because there's minimal medical malpractice insurance. It's because they can't afford it.
Right.
They're making a living too. So that was one obstacle to a lot of these patients getting heard. The other one was that Ben Brown, according to Joe Zarzar, who's a personal injury attorney in Pensacola, who is currently representing a number of patients who had been to see Dr. Brown, said that he was having them sign arbitration agreements. For those who aren't familiar, an arbitration agreement basically says if there's a problem or if I have a complaint, then I am turning down my right to a jury trial and I'm going to have a mediator. We're going to go into mediation. And according to Joe Zarzar and just about any other personal injury attorney I've ever talked to in any sort of liability case, arbitration agreements rarely work to the benefit of the individual who has had a problem.
Right.
They almost always are in favor of the corporation or the more powerful, if you will, individual who has potentially or allegedly caused the damage and caused the harm. So in that regard, Ben Brown essentially took the knees out from under them. If you have a complaint, you don't really have this legal access to the courts and a jury trial to hear your case and determine if medical malpractice played a role in the injuries that you say that you suffered. So those two things have been a real hindrance, and that's something that Michelle Salzman said she wants to address in the legislature, the minimum medical malpractice limits. That's something she wants to address. And I wish her luck on that because
it's good. That's a good thing.
It is good, but I'm curious because, as a journalist, I've certainly heard enough cases of whether it's the medical professionals lobby or the insurance lobby. They want that for a reason. And I see both sides. It's tough to be a doctor. It's tough. Everything's expensive. It's tough to be a business owner, period. Everybody's got their hand out. So I can understand that, but it's not good for patients when it comes to that. And then the other part of it, too, the arbitration agreements, it turns out that the Florida state Supreme Court, the Florida Supreme Court, ruled years ago that these doctors in the medical community are not supposed to be having patients sign arbitration agreements, that is essentially illegal because it is, again, they're adjusting the language where it's in favor of the doctor, and it undermines the intent of the legislature, which is to give patients who maybe have a problem or do need to pursue a medical malpractice claim, it undermines their ability to do that with these arbitration agreements. So they were like, ixnay, this needs to stop, no more. But Ben Brown, and it turns out, according to Representative Salzman, that doctors across the state of Florida are continuing to use these, and they're changing the legal language just enough to have a loophole. So the arbitration agreement isn't a violation per se because it's worded a certain way of that Florida Supreme Court decision. It is legal, but it's still something that was not intended. Going back to the Florida Supreme Court, this is not our intent. You may have changed the wording, but this isn't really what we want. This isn't giving patients the power to protect themselves.
Well, maybe that's where we are now. We've gone through the things that have happened. Now we're like in the consequences phase and the let's do something to go forward. These minimal amount of liability that you have to hold, I think that's good and fair. I hope that's not a big deal because, I mean, really, Hillary's not here anymore, okay? These ladies and gentlemen.
Those little babies don't have their mom.
Exactly. And Dixie and Marty don't have their daughter.
Their baby's
right.
gone.
And she's somebody's sister, somebody's friend, even somebody's wife. So all that, what's the cost of doing business here? It has to stop somewhere. Every complaint should be taken in fully and read fully, and the person deserves a response. It's like me sitting here to you and going, hey, Molly, and you don't acknowledge me or act like this, that is not proper. That is disrespectful, and that is rude. And just because you're in Tallahassee doesn't mean anything. And I do wish Michelle Salzman good luck with that, because this is where it has to go, or else we'll be doing the same thing again. And believe me, there are plenty of other cases that may or may not be plastic surgeons, or it's people that have cut the wrong leg off. My mom was a nurse, and she told me that when she worked at the University of Alabama in Birmingham, one of the doctors had told her about a case where a doctor had cut off the wrong leg. And so the patient sued the nurse, not the hospital and not the doctor. And they said, well, why did you sue her? And they said, she's a bitch, and we like them.
Unbelievable.
But that's how people are.
Well, and that brings up a whole nother point that I have questions about, because Ben Brown did perform a lot of these procedures in hospitals, even though I know he allegedly did a lot of these corrective procedures for these problems in his office. There were a number of people within the medical community who were certainly aware, and I'm not saying they are to blame. I think a lot of these hospitals, their take is, we did everything right on our end. He was the one that fell down, or if there's any potential for mistakes, it was on his part. Any liability for blame is on him. But at the same time, if you're in that, just like in the world of pharmacy, just like in the world of journalism, you know who your hard hitters are. You know who your reporters are that are really going to go for the gusto. You know the ones that cut corners. Maybe don't interview all the people they need to, but just do the bare minimum or the basics to get by. And I'm not saying that they should have sounded the alarm, but I do feel like that there were certainly more people that knew that there were problems. I have a lot of questions for North Florida surgeons. That was the LLC that he basically had his HR and his payroll with. And what I'm learning is that, groups like that, if you're an independent doctor, then you can get cheaper insurance rates through this particular kind of LLC. And it's good. It serves a business purpose, that sort of thing. They're not necessarily regulatory, but they are also doctors and administrators of this business. And some of these patients I talked to said that North Florida Surgeons was certainly aware of whether it was, according to his former office manager, she said she worked with them when there were questions about money, essentially. And billing and how things were getting done. And some of these patients said that they also, when they were trying to get answers from Ben Brown and weren't getting anywhere, they went to North Florida Surgeons too. And again, not saying North Florida Surgeons is to blame, there's any problem, but they certainly knew, they were aware, according to the people that I've talked to. So how many other people within the larger medical community had heard Ben Brown's another patient has been sick, or maybe this patient went well, but I'm not sure about this one. And what could they have done potentially to either speak up and say, this needs to be stopped, or how do we get the attention of the Florida Department of Health? Because we saw that in Stamatolis. Dr. Charles Stamatolis, we've done several stories on that. The very first one is Armed to the Teeth. You can check out that episode for the basics. But essentially, he was a dentist with complaints that go back decades for basically inappropriately touching patients as well as employees. And he is now in jail because he lied to the judge while he was on probation, and he was held accountable for that. But he was also convicted of a misdemeanor count of battery for inappropriately touching a 19-year-old employee who got the ball rolling on him. But it was not until, again, these complaints have been going on for decades. There had been civil suits he had been filed with over these charges. And when this story really broke after the 19-year-old came forward and said, hey, this is wrong what he did to me. Finally, two local dentists essentially went on the record as saying, they went to the local law enforcement. They said, we're concerned about him. I don't know if it's safe for him to be doing what he's doing. He doesn't seem like he's altogether there. And they went to the Department of Health with their complaints. So my mind is thinking, did anyone do that in this world of plastic surgery for Ben Brown?
I'm sure some people have, because they may or may not have been partnered up with him at some place. He may or may not have worked in their organization, and they're probably just like, there's such a thing as professional courtesy, but that's not ignoring when something is wrong or when it's malpractice.
Well, and there were two doctors' names that came up consistently from the patients that I talked to who referred Ben Brown to them. And again, he had done good work. A lot of these folks had talked to friends, they'd talked to other people, so they didn't necessarily have any reason to think that he would do shoddy work. It's almost like trying to find a contractor for your home. You go to people that have used that contractor. Did he do reputable work? Was he on time? Was he affordable? Some of these patients basically just based it off word of mouth, and you certainly are going to trust the recommendation of your primary care doctor or the doctor that's helped you through the cancer or the doctor that's been holding your hand through some of these difficult times. And now when it's time for the reconstruction or whatever the case may be, Ben Brown was the one that these two individuals recommended regularly. And I just wondered, at what point did they stop recommending him?
Well, because at first it was
probably... Or did they ever stop recommending him?
I think they probably did. At first, he was probably doing good work and fresh and altruistic and wanting to help people and stuff. Because I think of a plastic surgeon like an artist.
Absolutely.
Because you want to go in there and come out feeling and looking better. You don't want your doctor out here doing the least. And so I feel like what happened, either something happened in his life or either money became the plumb line instead of patient care first. Because if you take care of your patients, the money will follow. I don't care what profession you're in, or even just being kind to people. And like I said, acknowledging them. People will forgive you for a lot of things. I'm not saying that you need to forgive people for botching up your body, but maybe there was stress. Maybe there was, maybe that was during the time when his other marriage fell apart. Maybe it's some sort of impairment. Maybe it's some sort of like things that people enjoy. Gambling or this, that, and that. Something else is wrong.
Right. Well,
something's wrong.
Speaking of that artist standpoint, Jane Hawkins said that she felt like, because, aside from the many issues that she said she experienced, she said he also put an extra 5 pounds of fat from her stomach into her butt. And it was a procedure she did not consent to. She didn't know it was going to happen. She didn't want it to happen. She found out about it after she woke up from surgery and her butt hurt, basically. So when she had this 5 pounds of extra fat, she asked him about it. And he said, well, I felt like that was going to look good. And that was, another patient told me the same similar story, that she also woke up and had additional fat placed under her butt. Jane Hawkins' personal opinion is that he was also attempting to create women in what he thought looked best for them. And as an artist, and I actually found an old Facebook page of his that when he was with a different surgical group that did plastic surgery, his face is on there, and in that description, he basically compares himself to Michelangelo as an artist of plastic surgery.
Wow. Well, Dr. Stamatolis told us he was a god too. He said he was a Greek god. And this is this delusional thinking, and they think their gaslighting will work. Gaslighting is basically trying to it's an emotional manipulation trying to make you feel like you're the problem. And I mean, it comes from the term comes from like that old movie called Gaslight, where this man was gaslighting his wife because her great aunt had just died. And so she had a lot of jewelry. So he was walking around the house trying to find it. So he would be sneaking and creeping through the house, turning lights on and off, trying to make the wife feel like she's mentally ill. And over time, she kept telling him, I hear footsteps. The lights are flickering. And so he told, oh, that's just in your mind. You're just making that up. But that was him looking for the jewels.
Yes, exactly. And people who are misleading or misguiding or don't want to be honest about their intentions will certainly try to smoke screen and fog and gaslight, to your point. And my last conversation with Marty Ellington before I did this latest story, every single conversation we've had, he has not been a huge fan of the nature of the relationship between Hillary and Ben. He described it as a toxic relationship. There are certainly some law enforcement reports that would indicate that there was some drama, for lack of a better way to put it. She had supposedly made a suicide attempt by taking a lot of Valium. And Marty and I have talked about that a couple of different times. And he said, my daughter did not want to kill herself. She did not want to die. He goes, I think that was just more out of frustration over the nature of their relationship. And he said that there would also be threats of suicide on Ben's part as well. That this was basically the nature of their relationship was very volatile. And then there are others that basically said they had some unhealthy habits, they had some unhealthy recreational activities, but that Marty said that, his daughter had been married before, and that's who she had her children by. And marriages don't work out. It happens. It's the thing about it. He said, but when these problems started to creep up with her relationship with Ben, she was reluctant to leave because she had just ended, because her previous marriage had ended, I should say. And here she had just married Ben. She's trying to rebuild their family, have some consistency and stability. And he said that she stayed and probably put up with behavior that she should not necessarily have put up with. But he essentially felt like that Ben Brown was emotionally and mentally abusive to his daughter and undermined her, and which led to some of this behavior,
Well, and everybody doesn't always tell their parents what's going on, because they will still be mad at the husband or the wife. And maybe they'd gone through that. Two big, passionate feelers, two big, people that are
charismatic, smart, fun-loving, I'm sure.
Enjoying life. But people that feel hard both ways. Feel happy both ways and sad both ways. But yeah, and it's unfortunate that someone thinks that life is that bad, and that's what breaks my heart when people consider suicide, and I take that very seriously, and I believe people. But that's all about feelings too. Obviously, we need to get to the bottom of this. Something has to be done. We're not idiots. We don't have to have a degree in medicine. We don't have to have a degree in administration for the state of Florida to see this is a real thing. It's gone on too long. Too many people have sat on their ass end about it and ignored people. Every single citizen in the state of Florida deserves an answer from the Department of Health and the Board of Medicine, or whomever they sent their complaint into, even if it's just a form letter. We're in receipt of your complaint.
Right. And if these complaints did not merit or warrant any additional action from the Florida Department of Health, that would be great to hear. Why or why not?
Right. Because we know they do that to other doctors. There are other doctors that have probably done less than that. I mean, way, way less than that they get a administrative complaint or a discipline or what have you. It's just unreal. It's unreal to me how all of this from one person, one physician, can seem to get lost or fall down a rabbit hole, or it doesn't right. Let me tell you something. Those ladies that I have seen their wounds, I'm in healthcare and I can't look at it.
It is hard to look at.
I can't, because it makes me sick, because I know what's in there. I know their guts are in there.
Yes.
And that how close it is. And then I'm like, there are people that get an infection. We had tons of people that died through COVID by getting a virus. So there's something wrong. And our challenge is for the state of Florida Department of Health to listen to our representative, Michelle, and see what you can do to help. We're not dummies up here. These things happen. Don't gaslight us.
Right. Give patients the power that they need to actually bring legitimate complaints for evaluation, or
Right.
any complaint for evaluation, to see if it's legitimate. Because if personal injury attorneys are their only avenue for justice, then that does all of those opportunities need to be
Right.
addressed, whether it's the arbitration agreements, the lowest level of medical malpractice insurance. And then also Marty Ellington has been working with Michelle Salzman, or talking to her about his desire for what's called Hillary's Law, and that would essentially keep physicians from being able to perform on their own family members.
That's good. Well, that's a wise practice anyway.
It's recommended by the AMA,
right. It's
American
not-
Medical
right.
Association.
It's not illegal, but it is highly suggested that you don't do that, because you lose your objectivity. You're biased and you're prejudiced about it, and you're like, well, maybe they don't need that, or what have you. Let somebody else do that. But I mean, this part right now, this article that you wrote, this is on the second one, Buyer
Yes.
Beauty Buyer
Yeah,
Beware.
this is Jane Hawkins and her son on the
That's her
cover there.
story on there. I love her so much because she said, my name's Jane Hawkins and here's what happened to me. And she's a smart lady, and she wrote a letter as well. Many people wrote them. So we're at the point we have to do something.
She filed a complaint with the Santa Rosa Sheriff's Office for assault, for
Oh, wow.
basically putting that extra 5 pounds in her.
That makes me mad. That makes me very mad, because you don't get to decide that. That was so wrong. That right there, that one thing on its own is wrong.
And she's not the only one. I have other patients who have gone on the record with saying similar things. And you know, you talked about money perhaps being the motivator. You know, when COVID hit, certainly plastic surgery fell into that elective category. I would imagine that there was a drastic shortage of income. And like a lot of us, you know, maybe he is living paycheck to paycheck or has different loans out to run his businesses. I think that would be normal. But I think you're starting to see that catch up with him now. I was checking in the Santa Rosa County Clerk of Court's website, and just in February, Whitney Bank out of Mississippi has filed a couple of lawsuits against Brown, as well as a number of LLCs that he owns or in his name related to his practice in medicine, and basically saying that he's defaulted on loans and they're pursuing, you know, getting their money back.
Of course.
Yeah, I know. And it's varying totals, but between the two, just at a glance, it's definitely well over $1 million.
Oh, yeah, over $1 million. Well, and we wouldn't even be discussing this if there was awareness about what he was doing. That's why I think there's some sort of stressor or something that's making him not see, you know, some sort of dysmorphia that he can't see what he did. But I mean, if you can't see that, you do not need to practice medicine cutting on people. You might need to go into academia, or you might need to go into recruiting or something like that, where you don't touch patients.
Right.
You know, because this makes me so sad. All of it. Hillary makes me very, very sad, because she didn't ask for that. These people that he's doing the Kim Kardashian butt enhancing things for, nobody asked for that. You don't get to, I mean, what if somebody came in the pharmacy and said, I want OxyContin instead of my Motrin? I don't get to decide that.
Yeah.
That's not what the orders are. So, I mean, we're at that part right now, and I feel so invigorated by it, and I feel so everybody coming together and being honest and giving names and standing behind what they say. And I realize some people can't, but I have heard and seen so many people contact you.
Yes.
You know, to say, I just need to tell my story. That's when a person starts healing, when they can tell their story, because they're heard and seen. So even with Stamatolis, the young girl, when you were able to tell her story, that is what got him incarcerated.
That's right, Caroline West, and she's since filed a civil suit as well. So,
Right.
I mean, and sometimes that's what it takes. You know, if you know, he was convicted of a misdemeanor account of battery, which is next to nothing when it comes to accountability in the law enforcement world. So I say good for her for filing a civil suit. And then also, people like that need to be stopped, and sometimes money is the only way to get their attention.
Right. Or maybe a timeout. That's what I call it. A big old timeout that you can think. Because I don't know what Ben Brown's doing right now, but hopefully I would hope that he's trying to look back on some of these things, because I don't think he's a bad person. I think he let something else motivate him, and he lost his way, is what I think. And nobody dare said anything to him, or if they did, he simply couldn't hear it. We know about a physician in his same field that asked him, "Do you mind if I tell you about this surgery and how I did it?" He basically told him, "F off, man. I don't need you. I know how to do everything already. And this is why we're right here."
I know. And it is heartbreaking to hear
Yeah.
from a lot of these patients. And we'll see where it goes. But I know it's good to know that Representative Salzman is looking into it, that some of these issues are being addressed. We'll see where it goes. I know sometimes there is this reaction like, okay, here's the problem, let's fix it. But especially in the legal world, it
Right.
takes a little bit of time, especially
Right.
for lawmakers.
Well, and I want to encourage people to basically get in touch with you if they have a
Yes.
story to tell, or any employees, former employees, because we've heard things from them too.
Yes.
You can be heard, and you're among dozens and dozens and dozens now. You're not by yourself, and we need everybody's story. And we can take it anonymously, or we can take your name, but we want to be able to attribute everything to someone that said it.
Yes. And some of these folks that came forward with their stories and did not want to be named publicly have provided me with paperwork that basically validates that they were patients, that they did file complaints in some cases. They provided me with pictures, provided me with videos. So if you are one of those and you're not sure if you want to go public or not, Pam's absolutely right. Contact me, Molly at mollybarrows.com. Email me, let me know what your situation is. If I'm going to use the information in any way, shape, or form, even if I'm not naming you as an individual, I need to verify that you are who you say you are, that you are a patient, that you can show me a bill, that you can show me, what it was that you had done, and you can show me where these legitimate medical concerns were, because that's what we've seen in the patients that we've had so far. This is not based on random accusations, made up allegations. These are patients from their very mouth, from the pictures, from their statements, from attorneys who have talked to many patients as well. So we're hearing it from all sides, and people who don't want to be held accountable. It's easy to say, well, this isn't true. It's all made up. That's great. Well, then we want to hear from you too.
Right. And hey, go into court. Like you said, the personal injury lawyers, people, they kind of give lawyers a bad rap. But what if they weren't here?
There's no recourse. The American government certainly got to be like, okay, we'll fix all this. The state of Florida's not going to make your complaint over a doctor hurting you the top priority,
Right. Well, and this is a grassroots effort, a grassroots movement, and there will be change from it. I'm encouraged by that.
Yes.
It's sad that the cost of doing business was Hillary's life and the people's bodies getting maimed and things like that. I'm an emotional person, you know that. And I believe that this set people back, not just physically, but emotionally and spiritually and mentally, because we got ladies walking around out here that have been blaming themselves. When someone hurts you, that is on them, not you. So this was harm. First, do no harm. But we're dealing with something different. And I stand encouraged that something good is going to come out of this.
Me too. And I would also just encourage women, especially if a person in authority, whether it's a doctor or if it's someone that you have gone to for advice, whether it's about your body or your car or legal issues, and somebody tells you something that makes your hair stand on end, or if they invalidate you in some way, leave if you can. Push back. Say no. This isn't right. Fight for yourself. Stand up for yourself. Not because it's easy, not because you even necessarily want to, but just know that you don't have to take it.
Right.
You know?
And find somebody that will listen. That's how I found you. I was miserable and beaten down, didn't know where to go, who to talk to about my sister being murdered and my nephew doing it, her own son killing her. But the minute that someone listens to you and it listens to your whole story is when you start healing, at least, emotionally and inside.
Absolutely. And not every story actually results in wrongdoing or misdeeds that have happened. Sometimes it's people's perception of what happened and they feel mistreated. And sometimes they actually were. Sometimes maybe there wasn't, but they felt that way. And it's important to be heard.
Right. Well, encouraged. We got our state representative looking into this. I do believe that the Department of Health is looking into it, and let's just keep putting the stories out there until we get a change.
That's right. We're going to continue to follow it. So be sure to tune into Gulf Coast Confidential. From what I understand from the sheriff's office and the medical examiner's office, they are hoping to have something, at least as far as the autopsy results, perhaps in the next couple of weeks. Now, that is just based on their initial estimation that it would be several months. We have hit several months. It's getting to be that point. So from what I'm told, that we are getting closer to having some sort of a decision. And we'll know once those toxicology results are in and the autopsy results are in, whether or not there will be charges filed against Ben Brown.
Right.
And that will be one answer I think that a lot of people are waiting to hear, certainly her family.
Yeah, I'm personally, I want to see the autopsy, and I would like to see the toxicology reports and anything else that went along with that, because this cannot happen again. I pray to God it doesn't, but let's all learn something from it, even Ben Brown.
Absolutely. All right. Well, Pam, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, and thank you for joining us. That's it for Beauty Buyer Beware 3 on Gulf Coast Confidential. I'm your host, writer, and producer, Molly Barrows, with co-host and researcher Pam Hill. And a big thanks, as always, to our director, editor, and production engineer, James Roy. And remember, you can listen to more Gulf Coast Confidential episodes wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. You can also watch on the Gulf Coast Confidential YouTube channel. Just don't forget to like and subscribe, y'all. Subscribe.
Like.
We'll see you next time.